You're busy, right? That's why our show puts in the work to keep news simple. So if you're on the go and want to know, start here with Al Jazeera.
Of this documentary, what is behind that honest struggle?
First of all, full credit to being creative about that title was my wife. I had multiple titles of the film as I was working on it, and my wife came up with it. Sadiq's name essentially, comes from the idea of truthfulness and honesty, and the film is completely about his struggle. So it just like popped in so so well, and it worked perfectly to be the honest struggle being Sadiq's struggle.
Sadiq, there's a moment where we weren't on you, but I could hear you, and we were wondering what happens when you get out. You have this community of brothers in prison, and then you have to look for your community now that you're a convert outside. There was a moment where you met up with an old friend called Rochelle, an old childhood friend, and you were chit-chatting and telling her about your conversion. And I just want to share with our audience a little scene from that moment. Have a look.
Coming back over here in the neighborhood where I've caught murders at on the block, where we did shootings in the playground. Coming back on the block and being reminded of where it is I come from is my way of trying to share with the block that I contributed to the problem. My name is Sadiq. Sadiq means truthful. So one thing it is I'm not gonna do is dishonor my own name like I've done my life. I buried Darrell. I buried Danny Boy. I honor who it is that I am when I hear the word Sadiq.
I think it's good that you become the person that you are now.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. It took a lot.
Yeah.
You turned out good. It just took so long.
It did. It did.
Sadiq, that is deep, dark shade Rochelle is throwing on you, old friend.
Yeah.
But the reality of finding a new community that you've never experienced, tell us about that.
Well, to embrace Islam in prison gave me a sense of belonging. It gave me the true identity of what brotherhood was all about. Remember, that's the reason why I joined the gang in the late 60s and 70s, because I was in search of brotherhood. But having discovered Islam, I also recognized the fact that that was the otherhood. That wasn't the brotherhood. So, it gave me something it is that I've never experienced before. It gave me a sense of family. It gave me a sense of commitment. And coming out to the street and not feeling the same thing in certain areas was devastating to me. We had a very strong sense of community in prison. And, to come out to the street and not experience that was very devastating to me. And I think that was one of the hardest things it is that I've ever encountered before in my life, because I've had so much great expectation and so much belief in my Islamic community, in the brotherhood. So I had to talk with Justin about that on more than one occasion, about how it was so different out in the street. And I thought it would be a whole lot better on the street than it was in prison. However, along with Justin and a few other brothers that I talked to, I was able to maintain, but it was very difficult. But I wouldn't trade this position for all the tea in China, because now I recognize that it is truly part of what I call an honest struggle.
I think what's mentioned there is very important, and that's why the Green Reentry Program and similar programs are so important. In addition to the job training, there's the support, peer support, which sometimes the prison life, as everyone knows, is very structured. And Islam is a very structured religion. 5 prayers, Jummah, Friday congregation, Quran reading, Quran study, group conversation, fasting Ramadan together. So you put the structure of Islam and you combine that with the structure of incarceration, that's a whole lot of structure. And everyone's together almost 24/7. you come out into the street, and this is from my experience working inside of the prisons and also in an inner city community, imam in an inner city community where we had people reintegrating back into the community. That structure in many instances is completely gone. You might find it at the morning prayer, the Fajr prayer, where a decent number might come together. Then everyone's going to work. This one's going to work. This one's going to take the kids to school. This one's going to do this, that, and the other. And you might not get together until Jummah, the Friday prayer. And so having programs where there's a sense of continuity in terms of that structure, in terms of a support group, in terms of job training to assist the process of reintegrating, fully reintegrating back into society is absolutely important. And I'm so happy for Sadiq that he was able to find that opportunity in the context of the Green Reentry Program.
So, Imam, what you're saying there, I want to chime in here because people watching this are weighing in. This is Mahnur, and she says what returning citizens often need is a little bit of extra help when leaving prison to keep themselves out of trouble, she says. Businesses should perhaps accept a quota of former prisoners when employing and give them a chance. Without that routine and distraction, it's easier to fall back into old ways. So someone else who's weighing in on that idea of what happens when people come home, return to society, is someone who works at IBAN, the company, the organization that you've heard our guests talk about, Inner City Muslim Action Network. And they're the ones that have the Green Reentry Program that Sadiq, you were a part of, one of the founding members of that. This is Tanisha Coleman, and she talks to us about what some of these returning citizens often face.
I believe the main difficulties of being a returning citizen is the stigma that comes with the title of being a returning citizen. People tend to judge you on your past as opposed to trying to help you really cultivate and figure out what your future's gonna look like. You walk around with this dark cloud, and it comes with not forgiving yourself for whatever mistake you may or may not have made. But I think it's really important as a returning citizen to really see your future self, to forgive yourself for your past, and to look at how you can be a better person in the future.
So Justin, as the filmmaker behind this, were you surprised at that difficulty, or is that the reason you decided to tackle this?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely one of the reasons I decided to tackle it. If you look at the statistics on reentry, it's just absolutely, disappointing and depressing, frankly. And I see, organizations like Iman, their contribution is so crucial. They, kind of are following up on the legacy of people like Malcolm X, who, when coming out of prison, said, you know what, the first thing I want to do is try to help pull my brothers out of this situation. So I think, that was definitely a big motivator for me, and to, inspire people to take this as a serious priority. And there's a lot that we can do in order to help people that are really simple things. One of the first people that I spoke to when I was making this film was a brother named Elijah, and he was from Iowa. And when I went out and visited him, just the community had just kind of thrown him to the side, and he just said, everybody's going to salam me at the mosque, but I just want somebody to play Xbox with. So it was really kind of difficult to see that, and that type of stigmatization that happens to people that are coming home is disappointing, and I feel like Muslim communities can do a lot to improve that.
Sadiq, I'm just looking at some photographs here from the screenings from The Honest Struggle. I'm looking at screenings in Indiana prisons. I'm just going to scroll through some of the publicity that you and Justin have been doing. This is your beautiful wife. You'll have to watch the film to find out her plot line. Very interesting there. You look so comfortable being a representative of what it means to convert to Islam, coming out of prison, and then going on that journey. What are you able to share with people? What is your message for people at the end of this film? It's more than just your story.
Well, to begin with, if I could go in every prison in Illinois, I would tell them to try to get in touch with Iman, because Iman was responsible for me having a place to come to. It was responsible for me being in a Muslim setting to continue to practice the Deen of Al-Islam. And I didn't really begin to struggle until I left Iman. If I had any kind of control over the situation, I'd have ran back. But I couldn't do that because I knew that space was also available for other brothers coming out. So the message it is that I would like to give to people concerning Islam is this. At some point, you got to recognize the fact that you're in manifest error. You got to recognize the fact that you need to be doing something different. I tell brothers all the time, don't wait till the judge tell you got 40 years or 50 years before you realize that Islam is available to you. Don't wait until your life is over. You're going to have no control of them. You got to answer for everything it is you've done before you realize that Islam has been given to you to help you straighten your life out. So more than anything, I want to continue to assure brothers in prison that when you come out, as long as you maintain the deen, as long as you continue to make your salats, as long as you continue to honor Ramadan and do everything that is necessary for you to do as a Muslim,
which is why on YouTube right now, someone is watching what you're saying and writing in, if this works for inmates or former inmates, then why ostracize them? A spiritual awakening is tantamount to rehabilitation. Of course, you can see that on the live YouTube feed of this show. But I actually want to play a video comment we just got on Instagram from someone who talks to us about what he can do. He's asking a question. Have a listen to Hakeem in this comment.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hakeem Muhammad. I'm from the South Side Chicago, and I was really inspired by the film, The Honest Struggle. And my question is, how can we better reach our brothers in the streets with the message of Islam, the brothers who have been so oppressed?
Imam Zaid, I'll give that one to you.
Yeah. Well, what we used to do in New Haven, Connecticut, amongst other things, is we had a van. We called it the Dawah Mobile, and we put some speakers on the roof of the van, and we put a PA system that was powered by the cigarette lighters, and we would go through the streets and pull up wherever there was a crew of brothers, and we get out and we just talk to the brothers and embrace them and encourage them. And many times there would be people who weren't Muslims. Sometimes there were people who were Muslims who would start coming to the masjid. I think we have to open the doors of the masjid. I think a very important thing in terms of what we can do is we have to be living representatives of that truth, regardless of the external situation, regardless whether we're ostracized or embraced, whether we're marginalized or celebrated, no matter what the external condition. And Sadiq said something that spoke to this. We have to rise above and be an example, and that example and that inspiration will help others who might be dealing with the difficulties to pull through.
Imam
I know some beautiful brothers that are like saints who came through that prison system, and nothing
Thank you so much, Imam
that they
Zaid.
encountered on the outside was going to stop them. Okay.
Imam Zaid, no apologies needed. Speaking truth right here on the stream. Imam Zaid, Sadiq, Justin, thank you very much for being on the stream. We cannot talk about this film without telling you where to see it, and you can see it wherever you are in the world. Justin is in full promo mode right here, so you can see it on iTunes. And also, if you go to the website of The Honest Struggle, you will see it on Amazon Instant Video and also on iTunes, and also a Pivot Share around the world and coming soon to Google Play. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's such a pleasure having you on the stream today. Now, this show is not just thrown together. We put it together with an incredible crew. One of our incredible crew, one of our family, is Maddie Finkel, who is leaving today. So, Malika, how do we see her? Let's cut to the control room.
I would like that.
All right, so let's cut to the control room so we can give Maddie a big thank you and a round of applause. Even our guests are applauding too. Maddie Finkel, we will miss you. We love you very
Christopher Wiley.
The death of journalism is only the first signal for the death of democracy.
Studio B Unscripted on Al Jazeera.
We understand the differences and similarities of cultures across the world. So no matter where you call home, Al Jazeera will bring you the news and current affairs that matter to you. Al Jazeera. Every year, 50 million tons of electronic waste is thrown away. The majority is illegally dumped in developing countries.
Right now, electronic waste is the most traded hazardous waste.
Retracing the tech through the criminal organizations making big profits and asking why the West is turning a blind eye. Man-made on the e-waste trail on Al Jazeera.
Well, the number of infections in the U.S. sets new records as it grapples with bringing the coronavirus pandemic under control.
They have to go back to work. Our country has to go back. Our country is based on that.
I'm Rochelle Carey. This is Al Jazeera Live from Doha. Also coming up, a call for unity. Xi Jinping says the U.S. and China must work together to fight the virus. The party is over. Fears that New Orleans could soon be dealing with an outbreak worse than that in New York.
The number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the U.S. now tops 83,000, more than have been recorded in China.
Reasons. You do it to prevent the further spread, as we call mitigation, but you also do it to buy yourself time to get better prepared for what might be a rebound.
In New York, which has been hardest hit by the outbreak, hospitals are becoming overwhelmed, with worse predicted to come. The need for ventilators and respirators for patients, as well as protective gear for doctors and nurses, remains acute. One New York City hospital recorded 13 coronavirus deaths in 24 hours.
We will vanquish this virus.
But President Donald Trump continues to question the stay-at-home orders affecting much of the U.S. population, saying he wants Americans getting back to their jobs soon for the sake of the economy.
They have to go back to work. Our country has to go back. Our country is based on that. And I think it's going to happen pretty quickly.
The world's biggest economy has suffered a sudden and significant shock as consumer spending has dried up, Shops and restaurants have been closed and restrictions have been placed on movement. A record 3.2 million American workers filed for unemployment benefits last week.
Well, this number of new claims for unemployment benefits is truly unprecedented, and it represents the unprecedented nature of what we're going through right now. During the financial crisis and Great Recession, the highest or maximum number of new claims for unemployment benefits we saw was approaching, let's say, the 700,000 mark.
Help for struggling workers and their families is on the way as the U.S. Senate passed a $2 trillion stimulus and relief bill. The House of Representatives will vote on the legislation Friday. The measure gives many U.S. households a cash infusion of $1,200 or more, depending on income and family size. It also increases and extends unemployment benefits. As new centers of coronavirus transmission emerge around the country, the pandemic and the economy both seem certain to get worse before they get better. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera.
Robert Scott is from the Economic Policy Institute. He says there will be little control over how corporations use the money from the financial package passed by the Senate earlier this week.
It's certainly large. It's the largest spending bill that's ever been passed by the U.S. Senate, as we expect to be passed by the House and signed by the President tomorrow. But it's just a down payment. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said this is just a relief bill. It's not even a stimulus. So there is much more that's going to remain to be done to repair the damage that's going to be done to the economy. About half of the money will go to workers, either directly or indirectly, including through loans to small businesses. It can be used only to retain workers and so-called work-sharing arrangements, where workers would be furloughed and if firms kept them on the payroll, they get their wages. So that's a very good measure. But there is about $500 billion that's going to go to a bailout to corporations, and there are very few controls, very weak controls on that spending, and it could just go to boost stock prices or raise executive compensation. So about a quarter of the package, I think, is pure pork for the corporate sector.
China and the United States say they're working closely together to fight the coronavirus pandemic. The show of solidarity comes after weeks of tension between the two sides. President Trump earlier called the illness the Chinese virus, and Chinese officials attempted to blame the U.S. for the outbreak. China is banning most foreigners from entering.
Very much infuriated China, and China in turn, as you mentioned, many Chinese diplomats taking to Twitter in particular to blame the U.S. military for perhaps bringing COVID-19 to China at the end of last year. So we did see at some point, really, it seemed like the U.S. and China had hit rock bottom in terms of their diplomatic relationship. So according to the Trump administration, it was President Xi who sought out this phone call, and he was calling on Trump
The U.S. has canceled military exercises scheduled with the Philippines as a precaution against the coronavirus. The annual exercises have been held for decades and involve thousands of American and Filipino soldiers and some from Australia. But these would have been the last because last month, President Rodrigo Duterte ended an agreement allowing U.S. troops to operate in the Philippines for such drills. And in Australia, the military is being called in to help enforce the mandatory, that is, self-isolation of people returning from overseas. More than 3,000 in Australia are infected, and measures to restrict movement have been tightened. Nicola Gage has more from Sydney.
The government says this is necessary because about 2/3 of people infected with coronavirus in Australia have come from overseas, and even if they were in self-quarantine, some have been passing it on to family members, and we need to get onto this if we are going to contain this spread. So the military will be helping make sure that this is enforced and these passengers do stay in these hotels and other facilities. They'll also still be getting At the moment, we'll have to see if there will be more restrictions, but the government, especially in New South Wales, has said if these numbers rise, we will see tighter restrictions.
People and testing for the virus are being increased. EU leaders are calling on nations to work together. Neve Barker reports.
This is how Spain's hoping to win the war on the coronavirus. Police are among the first to be tested, but it's hazardous work for these medical staff. A large number of those testing positive are health workers. In Madrid, where an ice rink's been turned into a makeshift morgue, more hearses arrived on Thursday. The death toll's risen to more than 4,000, overtaking China. And in Italy, still Europe's worst affected country, the dead have been temporarily stored in churches before being sent for cremation by army truck. In a deserted European Parliament chamber, the Commission President urged Europeans to show solidarity. Several EU countries, including Germany and France, have banned exports of protective gear to avoid shortfalls at home. Ursula von der Leyen warns the practice undermined Europe's joint response to the crisis.
We all share this responsibility. None of us can do it alone. And certainly no member state can handle this crisis on their own. And because in this crisis, and in our union more generally, it is only by helping each other that we can help ourselves.
In Paris, health workers are conducting drive-through testing in the streets. France's death toll rose by 28% on Thursday. Tracing the spread of the virus is vital for controlling it. President Macron is one of several world leaders joining G20 talks remotely, hoping for a global approach to the pandemic. On the same conference call, the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He believes Russia can defeat the virus in less than 3 months with tough measures. The country will suspend international flights from Friday, and Moscow will close all shops except pharmacies and grocery stores a day later. In the British capital, work's continuing to convert a massive exhibition hall into an emergency hospital. The number of people in the UK who have died from the virus has jumped by more than 100 in a day for the first time. The British vacuum cleaner maker Dyson has now joined a growing number of technology companies developing ventilators to help the country's healthcare system.
I've been ill for 2 weeks.
One British woman's stark account of having the virus has been shared online. Karen Mannering is 26 weeks pregnant.
I have pneumonia on both lungs. And I'm fighting for me and my baby. It's not worth going out.
The British government promised to ramp up testing by the end of the week, with hospitals in London told to expect a continuous tsunami of patients. Scientists are warning many countries in Europe that the worst is yet to come. Neve Barker, Al Jazeera.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera, we'll tell you how health workers in the epicenter of the outbreak in the U.S. are struggling to protect themselves, and why U.S.-led coalition forces are pulling out from a base in northern Iraq.
Hello, there's some more widespread rain throughout much of Indonesia. We've seen some pictures of flooding across into Java, and there is likely we'll see more of the same. You can see here as we go through the day on Saturday, some very heavy rains really developing later in the day throughout much of the south. Borneo again, and in particular, Sulawesi could be seeing some very heavy amounts of rain later in the day on Saturday. Some scattered showers into more southern areas of the Philippines. And really, it's a bit of a repeat as we head on into Sunday. The rain's very widespread throughout Borneo, perhaps not quite as heavy, but still very heavy rains across much of Java and also heavier into those western areas of Sumatra. And then across to Australia and New Zealand. Still some very windy conditions around, particularly further to the south, but it should be a dry day Saturday across much of Tasmania, much of the south east of Australia. But you see all these coastal areas, New South Wales up into Queensland, right up towards Cairns. We're seeing showers and some scattered thunderstorms. Mostly dry across New Zealand. It's cooler. We have got those winds in place, and the temperatures have come down in Perth as well. Mid-20s Celsius. Quite a stiff onshore breeze there, but again, it should stay dry. But the rains will continue, particularly up into the Cape York Peninsula, so more showers and thunderstorms in Cairns, and the rain beginning to push towards Melbourne, but warm ahead of it with a high of 26.
In the midst of a coronavirus pandemic, China is in lockdown. 101 East reports from inside the quarantine capital, Beijing, on Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera, wherever you are.
Watching Al Jazeera. Let's take a look at the top stories. More cases of coronavirus have now been confirmed in the U.S. than anywhere in the world. President Trump says he's committed to getting people back to work soon, but that is against the advice of his medical experts. China and the United States say they're working together closely to fight the pandemic. There's been tension recently with both sides trying to blame each other for the outbreak. And the Australian military has been called in to enforce the self-isolation of people returning from overseas. More than 3,000 cases have been confirmed. The government has tightened restrictions on people's movements. Let's focus briefly now on some other news we're following. U.S. troops have withdrawn from an airbase in northern Iraq. That follows a series of rocket attacks on bases housing coalition forces. Smell Fulton reports from Baghdad.
Fewer bases, fewer people. The U.S.-led coalition in Iraq is preparing to downsize. On Thursday, U.S. troops packed up their facilities at Qayyarah airfield in northern Iraq and handed over $1.7 million worth of equipment to Iraqi security forces. Bases like these are not only used for training, but also as a launching pad for joint anti-ISIL operations. Coalition officials say the move has been planned for months as part of efforts to increase the self-reliance of Iraqi security forces.
Our partnership continues with the Iraqi security forces, but in the future, you will see coalition troops in fewer places with fewer faces.
The departure from Qayyarah followed the withdrawal from Al-Qaim in Iraq's western Anbar province a week earlier. The K-1 base in Kirkuk will be handed over in the coming days. Some troops are relocating to other bases within Iraq, while others are leaving the country amid a temporary suspension of training due to COVID-19. On Wednesday, the French government announced it was repatriating its military personnel.
Those trainers are departing temporarily. This is a short-term movement for the French trainers to go home during this time of coronavirus and uncertainty. But the French have announced they will continue to support the government of Iraq with air support, with advisors inside of headquarters, and that we remain committed to the global coalition to defeat Daesh.
But there's another factor that may have precipitated the withdrawals. The coalition has faced increasingly accurate and at times deadly rocket attacks blamed on Iranian-linked groups. One such attack on March 11th killed 1 British and 2 American soldiers. One objective behind the troop movements is to consolidate them in fewer locations where they can be better protected. There have also been mounting calls for foreign troops to withdraw after the US targeted Iranian-backed groups on Iraqi soil. But not all of Iraq's political actors are united on the matter.
I think the withdrawal may be a relief for the Shia parties that issued the decision for foreign forces to leave. There is some fear from the Sunni and Kurdish parties that the withdrawal of the foreign coalition forces will upset the balance of power, meaning that Iran will become more powerful.
The coalition plans to eventually hand over some training functions to the NATO, but will continue to provide air support to Iraqi security forces as they prepare to stand on their own feet in the fight against ISIL. Simona Faltin, Al Jazeera, Baghdad.
Many fear New Orleans could become the next epicenter of a coronavirus outbreak in the U.S. Health officials say Louisiana's largest city has the highest growth rate of new cases in the world. Andy Gallagher reports.
This is New Orleans' most celebrated neighborhood. Now the French Quarter is a shadow of its former self. Businesses are closed, tourists are leaving, and now the Big Easy is facing a major health crisis. Officials say the city is on course to become the next coronavirus epicenter. The rate of new cases is the highest in the world and may in the next few days overwhelm the city's hospitals.
What isn't a theory, what is fact, is what's actually happening on the ground. And we know that it's serious. We know the case count is much, much higher than we obviously want it to be.
Many in the medical community blame the rapid spread of the coronavirus here on Mardi Gras. The annual celebration attracts well over 1 million visitors from all over the world. It happened at the end of last month, when the virus was already present in the US.
And what the governor has indicated is that we're on a path to look like Italy, and we need to prepare for that. Certainly the measures that we've put in are very stringent. The governor and the mayor have been very clear about stay home to save lives.
Despite the warnings, some are still gathering in crowds. Pastor Tony Spells holding outdoor services, potentially putting his congregation at risk.
There's a right to assemble. We reserve the right to worship God. We take all the necessary precautions of disinfecting our building, keeping people at a distance and what have you.
New Orleans is a resilient city used to dealing with natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina. The next few days could be equally as challenging. Andy Gallagher, Al Jazeera.
Even though New York is under lockdown, the city is struggling with the lack of police staff. Nearly 3,000 called in sick on Wednesday, and that is nearly 3 times the daily average. Just under 200 officers and 39 civilian employees are confirmed to be infected. The state of New York has seen more deaths and infections than any other in the U.S. 100 people in New York State have died from coronavirus in the past 24 hours. Governor Andrew Cuomo says officials are scouting for sites to expand hospital capacity, but he's warned the state is not prepared to handle the rising number of cases.
Almost any scenario that is realistic will overwhelm the capacity of the current healthcare system. We have approved the technology that allows 1 ventilator to serve 2 patients, what they call splitting, which is where you add a second set of tubes to a ventilator to do 2 patients. It's not ideal, but we believe it's workable.
Britain's government says it will pay self-employed workers up to 80% of their income during the pandemic. They've been under pressure since announcing a similar scheme for salaried employees last week. In the meantime, more than 500,000 volunteers have signed up to assist the health authorities. Jonah Hull reports from London.
With the peak of Britain's coronavirus outbreak thought to be 2 or 3 weeks away, hundreds of thousands of people have answered a government call for volunteers to support the health service and the vulnerable who've been told not to leave their homes. At one London hospital, they were setting up emergency COVID-19 treatment suites.
At the present moment in time, we've got a job to do. We've been briefed. We've been told by our managers that in line with government directives, we've got the staff and that we've got the manpower and the equipment to cope, but clearly I think we're going to need more.
The chief medical officer has said the ability of the health service to cope will be a close-run thing, succeeding if people continue to observe stay-at-home and social distancing guidelines aimed at reducing the peak when it arrives.
On the whole, the streets of Britain's cities are very much quieter, and police are being given new powers to fine or force people to go home if they're out and about for the wrong reasons. But behind the scenes, a lot of people, probably too many people, are still going to work in jobs that fall outside the government's definition of those essential to the running of the country.
At places like building sites, call centres and in the delivery business, thousands are turning up because they feel they have no choice. A massive package of government financial assistance has shielded many employees staying at home from being laid off, but there's been no help for the self-employed, for freelancers or zero-hours workers who must work in order to survive. Until now.
You have not been forgotten. We will not let you behind. We all stand together. So to support those who work for themselves, today I'm announcing a new self-employed income support scheme.
The latest intervention by Britain's Chancellor will go a long way towards helping some of the least well off over the longer term during this crisis. But with payments to the self-employed not due to materialise for many weeks, there'll still be those who can't afford to stay at home, even though with the approaching storm, now is the time they most should. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, London.
Leaders of the world's major economies have held a virtual G20 summit to discuss a coordinated response to this global pandemic. Our diplomatic editor James Bays reports from New York.
G20 summits are normally lavish set-piece events. This was last year in Osaka, Japan. But in the new realities of a closed-off world, the summit became a 90-minute video conference call opened by King Salman. Saudi Arabia holds the presidency this year. From the White House, the meeting was hailed as success.
There is great uniformity, I think. It was a terrific meeting. Tremendous spirit among all of those countries. You had 20 countries.
Earlier in the week, the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, launched a $2 billion appeal for funding for the world's most vulnerable, particularly those living in conflict zones and refugee camps. But there were no actual pledges in the summit communiqué and no response to a call by two prominent G20 members, China and Russia, for sanctions relief for countries like Iran, Syria and Venezuela so they can get the resources they need to fight the virus.
Ideally, we should introduce a joint moratorium based on solidarity, waiving any restrictions on supplies of essential goods and financial transactions for their purchase.
His spokesperson added that there was still a long way to go to see truly concerted and effective global leadership on the pandemic. There is a feeling that international diplomacy has been somewhat paralysed. The normal ways of working are not there, in part because the UN is based here in New York, the epicentre of the virus in the United States. James Bays, Al Jazeera, at the United Nations.
Health officials in Syria's rebel-held Idlib province are warning that 100,000 people might die unless the WHO provides much-needed supplies and equipment. Health authorities there are working with aid groups to prepare for any outbreak. There have been no confirmed cases so far in northwest Syria, but the virus has infected people elsewhere in the country and in neighboring states. Dr. Michael Ryan is director of the World Health Organization's Emergencies Program. He told Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoon that vaccines are coming, but will take some time.
It's going to take at least a year to bring vaccines into the fight against this virus. There are at least 30 candidate vaccines currently being developed or already under trials. In fact, trials started last week in the United States, and further trials will be starting in China and other countries in the coming weeks. That's a massive effort. It's going to require a coordinated public-private partnership to do that. We will get vaccines, but it's going to take time.
Dr. Ryan, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there right now, especially due to the rivalry between the U.S. and China. Has the WHO been asked to investigate claims that COVID-19 was man-made?
We tend to look for these explanations in situations when we've such a horrific event. But the reality is, and this has always been the reality, is that we human beings have behaved in a way over the last number of years. We've globalized the planet, and with that globalization have become some benefits in terms of freedom of movement, in terms of economy. But we have stressed the environment. We have invaded the animal-human interface. We have allowed diseases to cross into humans, and when those diseases do cross from animals to humans, those diseases can amplify in poorly equipped health facilities. They can amplify in peri-urban slums. They can amplify amongst stressed refugee populations, and then they can spread because we are connected globally. So the problem we have right now is man-made. The problem we have right now is that we have left ourselves vulnerable to emerging diseases. The diseases themselves are entirely natural, but the situation in which these diseases are spreading are because we, human beings, have created the conditions in which these diseases can spread and cause, as you've seen, tremendous damage to our health systems, to our economies, to our social systems, and most importantly, deaths amongst those we love.
South Africa has reported its first 2 deaths from the coronavirus outbreak. It has also had the highest total of confirmed infections in Africa at more than 1,000. Police are warning anyone who violates a 3-week lockdown that they face 6 months in prison. I'm Rochelle Carey. These are the headlines on Al Jazeera. More cases of coronavirus have now been confirmed in the U.S. than anywhere else in the world. President Donald Trump says he's committed to getting people back to work as soon as possible. But that is against the advice of his medical experts. He says more cases are being detected because of the country's robust response.
I think it's a tribute to testing. You know, number one, you don't know what the numbers are in China. China tells you numbers, and I'm speaking to President Xi tonight, I believe, and we'll have a good conversation, I'm sure. But you just don't know, you know, what are the numbers? But I think it's a tribute to the testing. We're testing tremendous numbers of people.
New York is under lockdown, but the city is struggling with the lack of police staff. Nearly 3,000 called in sick on Wednesday. Just under 200 officers and 39 civilian employees have confirmed infections. The state of New York has seen more deaths and infections than any other in the U.S. China and the United States say they're working closely to fight the coronavirus pandemic. There have been tensions recently with both sides trying to blame each other for the outbreak. China is now banning most foreign arrivals to prevent a second wave of infections. Katrina Yu has the latest from Beijing.
Xi Jinping requested to President Trump, according to state media, that he do whatever he could to improve U.S.-Sino ties. They seem to have hit rock bottom in recent weeks, with the two sides having a bit of war of words, with President Trump calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus and several U.S. politicians calling it the Wuhan virus. And this very much infuriated the Chinese government. And over the past few weeks, we've also had Chinese diplomats taking to Twitter in particular to blame the U.S. For potentially bringing COVID-19 to China via its military, and also criticizing very much the U.S. Approach to handling the virus in the U.S.
The number of new deaths has surged in Spain to more than 4,000 and is climbing in Italy. EU leaders have given the bloc's finance ministers 2 weeks to work out an economic response to the pandemic. And the U.S. has canceled scheduled military exercises with the Philippines as a precaution against the coronavirus. They would have been the final annual war games after President Rodrigo Duterte ended an agreement that allowed U.S. forces to operate in the Philippines. So the headlines, keep it here on Al Jazeera. 101 East virus lockdown in Beijing. That is up next.
How much is the coronavirus and the stock market chaos affecting the race to the White House? Will it be Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders who secures the Democratic nomination?
I believe we can beat Donald Trump.
Follow all the developments in the US election campaign on Al Jazeera.
In the midst of a coronavirus pandemic, China is in lockdown. Beijing, capital of the world's most populous nation, stands deserted. Millions of residents are forced to stay behind closed doors, in moves now being replicated in countries across the globe. On this episode of 101 East, we report from inside the quarantine capital of Beijing. It's been months since there's been a real reason to get up in Beijing. Other than to see the latest infection rate from the epidemic.
T'as vu? 44, presque 45 000 malades vérifiés.
I came to China as a journalist in 2007. I married Lulu, a Beijing girl. We have one son and live in an apartment building in the north of Beijing. I often travel around China for my work, but there's no moving now.
Là maintenant, il y a Gauthier, c'est bon quoi.
Around the cities, barriers have sprung up everywhere. In the provinces, across neighbourhoods, and around each apartment block. Where I live, men in uniform check everyone going in and out. The Communist Party's security apparatus is in full force. Neighbourhood committees, which usually monitor the political or social behaviour of residents, have now been turned into virus watchdogs. With temperature checks, mandatory quarantine if you leave the city, and mandatory masks, the people of Beijing have gradually disappeared from view. Forced to stay at home by both the government and from fear. So this is the only kind of report possible. A story of confinement. Our days seem empty, but they hold many questions for the future of China and the world. There's one piece of good news. Family unity has never been so strong. I even managed to get my son to give me a hand. The tap water isn't drinkable, so bottled water has to be delivered almost every day. Since our neighbourhood is closed off to all outsiders, we have to go and pick up the water ourselves. My son is lucky. The barrier that blocks off the entrance to our building isn't high. Since the epidemic began, Lulu and I must take new precautions. Each time before going out, we put on our masks. Since the quarantine began, we can't go anywhere without one. Otherwise, we'll be arrested. This is what the last of the 4 entrances to our area looks like. A checkpoint. To leave, we've been given exit cards. They're checked every time we go through. Looking at these Beijing streets, you'd think it's 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Instead, it's mid-afternoon on a Friday. Normally on a Friday, Beijing looks like this. It's nice to have more breathing room for a change, but it does start to feel a bit lonely. To make this tense situation worse, our temperature is checked every 300 metres. The shopping mall is as empty as the streets. Luckily, the basketball court's still open to liven things up. I'm surprised they're still allowed to play without masks. We can still find some hand sanitizer, but who knows for how long. There's another temperature check at the supermarket. At least there are a few more people here. Since we've been quarantined, we do a lot more cooking. It's a relief to see full shelves in the supermarket. Everyone in Beijing saw the pictures on social media of the empty stores in Wuhan. The situation in the epicenter of the epidemic, with tens of thousands of people infected, is on everyone's mind. But the situation here is nowhere near as severe as Wuhan. Nevertheless, the city is in lockdown. I'm meeting Miss Li, my translator, in Beijing subway. Her temperature is checked as she enters the station. All the entrances are now equipped with thermal imaging systems. If your temperature is above the threshold of 37.3 degrees, you're kept behind this barrier before being sent to hospital. In every train, a guard ensures that everyone is wearing a mask. There aren't many people to check. The problem is there's a shortage of masks. Miss Li and I are going to try and find some.
It says that the mask and alcohol are out of stock. 请问有口罩吗？电子的可以吗？电子口罩是哪种啊？
The only mask he has left costs $45. He's happy to recommend it.
这个是可以防治病毒的吗？您所谓病毒是什么？就是这个肺炎的这个传播是有效的吗？针对？
不管它是国标的也好，是美标的也好，2天一个。
2000一个。
2天一个。
哦，2天一个。
最基本的原则吧，就是说您 N95或者 KN95，您只能戴2天。 然后作用就没有了，这个呢，您可以戴2个月。
那您现在就是我如果想买你那种普通的惠民的口罩的话，我现在能买到吗？
今天应该买不到了，您来的太晚了。如果您要早点来的话，可能有可能。
明天早点可以再问一下，是吗？
应该是这么回事。因为每天这个惠民口罩基本上大概发放的就那么多。 周边的居民呢都知道有这个东西，他会来排队买。那个跟国家没关系，国家可能当时管控不了。但是他能管控的就已经管控了。
We keep looking and try another pharmacy a few blocks further on, but it's even more discouraging.
请问一下，现在开门吗？
你买什么跟他说，跟你买不跟你说。
哎，你好。
你看你买什么了？他这有的东西行，没有他不卖。
The staff won't even open the doors, and they hide when we try to ask them anything. After several attempts, one pharmacist finally agrees to come talk to us.
那我每天来问一下，什么时候能买到吗？他现在没有通知有口罩。现在都是哦。
How can the epidemic be fought without masks? The situation does explain why everyone is at home. I head to Tiananmen Square to see what it's like in the heart of the city. The footpaths have been closed off, so the only solution is to go around the square by bike. To the north of Tiananmen is the Forbidden City. There are police everywhere keeping people out. The city has never been so forbidden. A few metres further on is Zhongnanhai, the government headquarters. Its leaders work and live behind this door, confined by their fear of the virus. It's impossible to stop anywhere near it. And lastly is the most impressive view. The largest square in the world, full of history, with Mao's mausoleum right in the centre, completely deserted.
Voilà la place Tiananmen comme vous ne l'avez jamais vue.
With such tight restrictions at my apartment building and in the city centre, I'm curious to see how it is in Beijing's poorest neighbourhoods. Out here, companies house their workers in small one-room homes. Mr. Chen is a taxi driver who lives here. I've hired him for the day to show me around.
那得有居委会这个登记，然后我下去跟他说一下。你要是进的话，我下去跟他说一下，行吧？
我们就登记啊，什么把这些都登记了。
It's impossible to enter without the necessary pass. We try using Mr. Chen's.
登完了跟登记找居委会联系，咱才。这是我们小区的那个出入证，这是我们小区的出入证。
We're not the only ones waiting. No one escapes the radar of the neighbourhood committees. These workers, along with local Communist Party branches, manage the quarantine procedures. They not only grant entry and exit passes, but report people with a fever or those who go outside without a mask. Everyone is checked, even this couple who've lived here for the past 7 years.
从河北来的，公司要求，然后今天回。隔离完7天之后，然后就可以开工，因为现在有人在上班。对对。
您好，您好。
好，谢谢。
您有手续吗？采访？
记录。
那如果没有手续，您暂时不要拍照，好吧？
那行，那
请您先闭上吧。
咱去喊家圈吧。不在这儿。
We're refused entry without the necessary pass, so we try another entrance.
对。
你好，我可以进去吗？
你不能随便进去的，因为我不知道你们这些什么身份，你干什么来干什么。
我们想进去看一下。
看的话，你得进奔警务站那口，因为我们的领导就在那，都是在那块，就是说。
Living in Beijing these days means spending a lot of your time at checkpoints. Our driver is getting worried about being able to return home. We try one more entrance.
我们的都是主的民房，一会儿我看看能不能进得去。这就是我们的区那个大门口。
Since the crisis began, the number of local committee workers has risen. Volunteers, as they call themselves, are swelling the ranks in the nation's bid to fight the virus. In reality, they're all paid by the state to ensure that everyone obeys the rules. For some reason, we're let in.
我太晚进不来，因为你看我车里有个被子嘛，那一天我回来晚了，我就没进来，我就在车上住了一晚上。
Like everywhere else, the streets are deserted. It's hard to find anyone to talk to, except for this man who is outside for the first time in days.
就买点饼，买点土豆，买点菜啥的，那豆皮儿。对，疫情不经常出门，多买点。我们就仨人，我是帮家里人准备。2天出去一次。对，再见。谢谢。再见。
We're stopped at another checkpoint, this time in the middle of the road.
去哪儿啊？我们哪也不去，我这个前面掉一头，再出来。
给你测体温。还得先给你测体温。
来测一下体温。
好的，这女士。
我也要测吗？
对，全人都得测。
都要测。
啊，不介意你掉头啊。
对。
好的。慢着点啊。哎。
你还下来拍吗？
There's a surprise waiting for me when I get back home. This is the first time I've seen an ambulance at my building, where there have been no confirmed cases. We're now able to check, almost in real time, if anyone is ill in the building. Special apps allow us to locate those who are sick.
Le point bleu, c'est chez moi, chez nous en fait. Et là, autour,